G'day guys and welcome, my name's Michael and I am the Dead Aussie Gamer, here to share with you my tips, tricks, ideas and strategies for playing and running tabletop role-playing games. Today's video is a RP video for our players in the audience. Now, a lot of people think role-playing in like kind of a theatrical way is all about making up voices or coming up with a vivid personality for your character. And while that is definitely true, one element of role-playing I think gets really undervalued, and that is response and reaction. The thing is all role-playing games come to the very one simple premise, and that is your game master will create a stimulus for you, the players, to then react and respond to. How we react and respond will not only shape how you interact and how your character presents themselves on the table, but it also creates the type of game you're playing. If no one is role-playing, for example, and everyone's just enjoying the mechanical aspects of the game, that is a particular type of role-playing game that you'll be at. If, however, everyone's really engrossed in the story and the characters are vivid, again, response and reaction are what define that particular table. And we're going to be explaining how and why today in the various forms that we will find response and reaction. The first one that we are going to be discussing, of course, is, quite simply, character responses. Now, the character can respond in a number of ways based on what the player would like to do. Some players are rather shy and may not necessarily have their characters respond to a number of situations, preferring instead to remain silent and observe what's going on. Now, this is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But you need to acknowledge that not responding or not reacting is in its way a reaction. You know, if someone says, "Hey, did you enjoy that movie?" and I don't say anything for a while, of course people think I have a bad impression of it. The same can be said about role-playing games. If your GM is sitting there at the table and you are confronted by something that the GM is very proud of, like let's say they've spent a good few hours designing a great encounter and no one at the table says anything, that leaves an impression on the GM, and it can actually shape not only the encounter you're having, but encounters in the future. I know that there's a particular table at this point in time for me that has difficulties with response and reactions. When I put it forward a proposal or a character or an encounter, and my group just sits there and doesn't really react, or they kind of, only one or two people are reacting out of the table of 5 or 6, I kind of worry that maybe that encounter hasn't gone successfully. Now, I understand what it means. If we've got 5 people responding all simultaneously, it becomes hectic and noisy, and how are you supposed to do that? Well, there's a good way to be able to respond to situations that, even if you aren't, say, directly involved with what's happening, you can still have a visceral response without overshadowing other people. Allow me to explain. If an ogre walked into the scene and the ogre was attacking everyone, then everyone has a priority in order to respond. So it really comes down to who is the most likely candidate to respond to this encounter. Likely the scout, maybe perhaps the warrior, whoever is the most excited, those people respond first. Then down the chain you would continue. So who would be the next person, then the next person? And we'll go into what a response might be in a minute, but that is the order in which we do it in order to avoid response chaos or that white noise when everyone's talking simultaneously. However, there is an exception to this. If the ogre walked into that same scene and attacked one individual, it's then that individual's responsibility to react first. What do you do when this happens? Now, if somebody else wants to react to that, it is polite to allow the person being engaged by the game master to react first. But then afterwards, of course, follow the same rule. Person most engrossed in the action, person most involved in the action, all of you then take turns. Now, an appropriate response needs to come from a place of either A, good role play, B, good, I suppose, acknowledgement, or C, it has to be something short and succinct, something that's going to build or in some way, shape, or form drive some element of either the story or your character forward. So, having a character Okay, sorry. Okay, so many people play role-playing games in very different ways. Some people, they really get into their characters. Some people, they, just prefer to sort of sit a little bit back. The first reaction is kind of like a third-person reaction. What does your character physically do? All right. Eric the Bard, when the ogre charges towards him, will try to duck behind cover to avoid damage. This is a very third-person point of view because I'm referring to Eric in the third person. I'm taking from the perspective of me as the player responding to the action with my character. That is fine. That is a reaction. The second type of reaction is an in-character reaction. And now you can either do this third person or first person by going, Eric turns around and says, "Oh my God!" And he starts to look for a barrel. You might also take it from the perspective of being purely in character, in which case, whoa, okay, calm down. Maybe we can talk about this. Don't hit me. However you wish to react or respond, those two are probably the primary ones that you want to be using. Now, the last type of character response here is to not respond. And if you don't respond, it's like the orc charges and attacks you. If Eric doesn't respond, then you're not sure if you've heard him, or you're not really sure if maybe he's paying attention. Maybe he's on his phone. The character response here will be communicating the fear, the tension, and the value of what's happening in the scene, which is why it's important to react. All right. The second type of response, player response. Now, unlike character response, which is all about you reacting and moving and manipulating the character, your player response is about how you engage and you respond to certain things. Now, there is the correct response, which is you are embracing what is happening and you are accepting it and then you are engaging it. This is kind of like a sub-step between the player response and a character response. So, for example, the ogre charging Eric. As a player, I might be like, oh, wow, okay, yeah, ogres are pretty tough, and Eric is level 3, Eric's in trouble. That's a player response. It's an internalized one, but it's a player response. Because Eric's about to die, I need to do something, and then I'd make my character response. So that's where a player response comes in. Now, sometimes a player response should be quiet. It should be a silent element to it, like deciding what you want to do on your turn. However, a player response should also be appropriate when needed. If the GM is setting this tense scene, like, describing it like you walk into this large cathedral, it's old and withered, you can see dust falling from the rafters above you, don't use that opportunity to interrupt the pace of game, even if you've got a good question. Like, when was the last time someone was here? That's a great question, but it ruins the pace of the game because it's not a kind of quick turn reaction moment. It's we're describing the thing. You can wait until afterwards because maybe that was the next thing they were about to say. So, player responding inappropriately in that sense. Player responding appropriately would be something along the lines of, as he's describing this place, turning around to your other players and going, wow, that's really spooky. This place seems really dangerous and very hazardous. We need to be careful here. Now, that's you talking to another player, that's you engaging, and that is you driving that feel and that vibe of what's happening in the scene forward. Because you're assisting, you're helping create that sense of tension and story. Yeah? So that's what a good player reaction would be. Now, of course, there are going to be a multitude of different types of player responses to scenes. For example, there is the rules argument that always comes up. What happens? How do we respond to that? Easy. When we need to respond in a meta sense, we need to make sure that we are addressing something that isn't going to drive a character response. For example, if a character at a table is playing a rogue and the rogue has snuck off to do something, that doesn't necessarily mean that you as a player need to go, I need to keep an eye on that rogue, and have your paladin, who had no reason to understand what the rogue was doing or suspect the rogue of anything, will then follow the rogue in order to thwart them. This is an inappropriate response. So, again, player and character responses need to drive your story forward, not hold them back, and absolutely not give a broken impression. The broken impression is really, I've only seen it done from a player response perspective, and it's usually in horror games. So a horror game is all about atmosphere. It's about building a crazy, freaky, and spooky environment for your players as well as your characters. Now, one disarming technique that a lot of people use in horror is to laugh. Merriment and joy is almost a direct counter to horror. And if you as a player are, sort of making jokes, trying to undermine the horrifying thing that is happening, that could be the nature of your game. That could be how your table is working. But for me, at least, I know that whenever I'm playing a horror game and someone starts to crack jokes about a hideous monster with two heads, and someone's saying, "So if they fart, who do they blame?" It's like, yeah, okay, cool, yeah, it's funny. I as a person will find that amusing, but I'm trying to build a scene here, and that's kind of breaking it. So, player responses. And of course, don't get distracted and start to drag the game away. That's also a big one. Using your phone, starting to look on Facebook, stuff like that. Yeah, that's definitely going to that's a bad response. If you as a GM see someone at your table doing that, let them know, because again, you as a GM also have a right to respond to things. So yes, that. All right, the third and final one is, of course, inspiring your GM. So, part 1 and part 2. Player gets the stimulus, player responds to the stimulus, player passes on a response to the character, character responds to the scene. How a character can respond to the scene can not only be a great way to build and establish your background. For example, if I'm playing a coward, how would my coward respond? If I'm playing a reckless barbarian, how is my reckless barbarian going to respond? Instead of it just being that, you can also inspire your GM, not only through what you're doing, but also by passing the ball around to your other players and seeing what tale unfolds. I know I, as a GM, really observe my players while I'm playing in order to determine what things work, what things don't work, what do my players love engaging and what don't they? Do they respond at all to this, or do they not react at all to that? It is a huge part of what more goes into my decision-making skills. And, seriously, one good example I have is from the Descent into Avernus series that I was in. That was oops, sorry. That's my alarm. Telling me that I should be wrapping this up. The Descent into Avernus story, real quick. I was playing a character who hated angels, and that was a major part of their personality and their character. I wanted to build and develop this, but we had a very short period of time to play. So, in response to scenes that involved us dealing with angels, I would try to include little responses. My character, while the angels are talking, clenches their fists. Whenever the angels ask my character for a deal, or can you do this for us, he goes, well, what's in it for us? And if, push comes to shove, he always questions things like their honor and trust, and do they really have his best intentions in mind? All of these questions kind of build and develop the distrust of my character to angels. That is an appropriate character response. Now, player response. We had a scenario, and I won't spoil anything in case people want to go see Descent into Avernus, which I'll put a link in the description below to a playlist. Highly recommend watching the series. But as a player, there were a number of times where I, as a player, wanted to do particular things. I wanted my character to be a very supportive character, and in very early games, that's what I would try and do. And I needed to find a way to translate that from my player wanting to play a support role to my character in a support role. So I think in episode 1 and 2, I had moments where it was like, cool, my character cast this buff spell, and I will then say something encouraging to one of the players. Or, hey, this is another scene. Oh, that person's in danger. I'm going to, get in front of that and back them up and try to protect them. These are character responses to my player desires and decisions. And, if you know the GM of that channel, then you would know how dangerous many of those situations can be. So yes, this is how all of those things then work into practice. Once that then happened, my GM then realized and went, hey, there's a story here, and would then try to prompt me to explore that story through the encounters that we played. We encountered more angels. We encountered more scenarios where they were trying to deal with us versus us dealing with devils. And so which one did we pick? Of course, my character naturally leans towards the devils. The response to that is, we need to make more devil deals. We need to pull more of that devil stuff out till eventually it'll come back to a conflict with the angels. And that's how the GM was inspired by those reactions and responses. All right, I hope that wasn't too confusing, because I'm a little bit confused about it. But nonetheless, if you had to walk away with any bit of advice here, always remember, even if your response is minor, it has to push the story forward, it has to push your character forward, it has to do something to advance some element of the game. It also has to be something that is, going to communicate how you're feeling, and that is both good and bad. If you're not enjoying something, if you are, sort of struggling with an element of your game, react to it, but react to it in, the appropriate manner. Do you react in a character? Do you react as a player? Or do you just talk to your GM afterwards? What is it? Response, so important. Don't forget it. All right. Thank you so much, guys, for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, then please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. Go check us out on all our different other social media. Giving you guys a little bit of an update. Next week, we are going to be back on Facebook, as well as producing more videos once again, now that the holiday season is coming to a wrap. So if you want to go check those stuff out, again, the link will be in the description below, but next week will be when all the stuff is active. In addition, if you want to support the Dead Aussie Gamer, then head on over to our Patreon page, where for as little as $1 a month, you can basically help us keep the lights on. So thank you so much, guys, again in advance for all of that. And till next time, as always, game hard or die trying. Bye!